Hi, I'm Dr. Guy Riekeman, the Chancellor of Life University. And I'd like to welcome you to what I consider to be one of the most exciting programs that I've ever seen in my time in chiropractic. People often ask me what I think the future of the profession is. Will we survive? Will we be prosperous? And I guess on my good days, I give them sort of an upbeat view of the profession. And sometimes when you're facing challenges, looking at some of the statistics, et cetera, about our profession, you kind of turn and perhaps give a not so bright future. But the bottom line is it's very simple. The future of our profession will be whatever chiropractors make it. And what's exciting to me is that we're seeing a resurgence of the original principles of chiropractic. And by that, I don't mean the original practice of chiropractic, but literally the original principles that were based on, I believe, two completely unique ideas back in 1895. Number one, that the body was a self-developing, self-maintaining, self-healing, intelligent organism, what we call neo-vitalism today. And it certainly stood in the face of the movement of the day, which was a more mechanistic view of looking at the body and the universe and our planet as just a big giant machine. The second thing that our profession was based on was the idea that the nerve system is controlling and coordinating all the functions of the body and adapting the body to the environment. Now, in 1895, they couldn't prove that. In fact, when I went to school in 1969, Guyton's physiology textbook said that there were two control systems in the body. The nerve system, which they said essentially ran and coordinated the internal functions of the body. And then you had a completely disconnected immune system that adapted you to the environment. It wouldn't be until the mid-1990s that we understood through research that, in fact, the nerve system was also controlling the immune system. And so today we see that the idea of neurology, not just in chiropractic, but in the healthcare community at large, has had a dramatic change and is probably what I would consider to be the hottest area of healthcare today. I was also taught when I went to chiropractic school that if you damaged a nerve or damaged a nerve pathway, you could never regain use of that pathway, that nerves didn't heal and repair themselves. And of course, today with the concept of neuroplasticity, we know that that's not true. So we are literally at an exciting forefront of a movement in healthcare. I think the second thing that encourages me so much about the profession, we have a think tank at Life University called the Octagon. And every year we bring in experts from around the world in various areas. We put them in a room and we tell them to talk about particular topics. Oftentimes people ask me, hey, could I get in one of those conversations? I'd have to warn you, it's one of the most boring things I've ever sat through in my lifetime. In fact, I've gotten to the point where I go in and introduce the program, get out of the room and let them go to work. And fortunately, my good friend Dr. Jerry Clem, who heads up the Octagon as the director of the Octagon, then coordinates the conversations. What's unique, though, is that when they walk out of that room a few days later, they have incredible insights and they write incredible papers. And one of the years we brought together neurologists, neurophysiologists, chiropractic functional neurologists, neuroanatomists. We put them in a room and we told them to have a conversation about the nerve system. And when they came out, they said two things. They said, number one, that every single structure in the human body is there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to keep our nerve system alive and healthy as it goes through its process of conscious development or evolution during its lifetime. Let's face it, who we are when we come down through the birth canal, neurologically, in our consciousness, in our relationships, in our communications, and our understanding of the world, is not who we are decades later as adults. And so we go through this process of development or evolution during our lifetime. What they were saying was that we are not our heart, we're not our lungs, we're not our liver, we're not our pancreas, we're not our muscles. That in fact, the reason why I have muscles is to move my nerve system from one location to another so it can interact with whatever environment it needs for its growth and development. I know people all the time are talking about, I'm so in love with someone, I feel this love with all of my heart. Well, the heart doesn't have that capacity. It's an area of the brain, but it's not very romantic to tell someone you love them with all of your brain. But what we know today is that these structures in the human body are there for one reason and one reason only, according to the neurologist, and that's to keep our nerve system alive and healthy. So for example, we don't pronounce people legally dead when they've stopped breathing. We can start that again. We don't pronounce them legally dead when their heart stopped beating. We pronounce people legally dead when their nerve system has stopped functioning. And then that led to the second comment from this think tank. And they said this, that we are our nerve system. In other words, you aren't your heart, you aren't your pancreas, you are your nerve system. That's where you build relationships in. That's where communication comes from. That's where our thought, creativity comes from. That's where we interact with the environment. We are our nerve system. And if that is the case, if that is true, and it is, then how we take care of this nerve system and whether it's free of interference is of critical importance to who we are as a human being and how we grow and develop. At Life University, we created with the Board of Trustees a few years ago a series of statements about what the university stands for. And the first statement, which is our essentially our vision statement, says that our goal at Life University is to maximize the expression of the perfection within. We believe that people have more potential on the inside than what they're currently expressing, more potential for relationships, more potential for health, more potential for compassion and forgiveness. We believe that all of these factors lie within the human experience. And our goal at Life University is to help people realize more of their potential during their lifetime. The second statement, which flows from that, is that we recognize that the body is an intelligent, self-developing, self-healing, self-maintaining mechanism. In other words, the body is able to produce hundreds of thousands of cells every second that we're sitting here. Yet the greatest scientist in the world is yet to produce a single cell from scratch. We know that the body will always tend towards its optimum degree of health and well-being. If you cut your finger, unless you have really interfered with the function of the body is automatically going to repair and heal even without intention on your particular part. So we see the body and the planet as a living organism, as an intelligent, self-developing, self-maintaining, self-healing mechanism. This is the principle of neo-vitalism. We also recognize that in living structures like human beings, the nerve system is responsible for controlling and coordinating the function of the organism and how it adapts to an ever-changing environment. And it's this dialogue of the organism with itself and the dialogue of the organism with its environment that we label health in our society today. We also know that if you interfere with the nerve system, you get three outcomes. Interfere with the nerve system and you'll produce malfunction in the body. You'll produce the opportunity by weakening the body to have it experience diseases and symptoms. And ultimately, you reduce its quantity and quality of life. You know, we always reference back to Christopher Reeve's Superman, who fell off his horse and broke his neck. When he broke his neck, he had areas of his body that malfunctioned. In fact, he had some areas of his body that didn't function at all. He didn't, in fact, die of that. On his death certificate, they wrote he died of pneumonia. But it was because his immune system was compromised due to the damage to his nerve system that allowed him to be susceptible to what you and I would normally fight off day in and day out. And finally, we know that Christopher Reeve easily, logically, did not live as long as he would have, and certainly didn't have the quality of life that he would have had he not damaged his nerve system. Interfere with the nerve system, you always get malfunction, ultimately diseases and infirmities, reduced quantity and quality of life. The question then becomes, how do we damage the nerve system? What kind of factors do that? And we know they fall essentially into three categories. First, you can have physical traumas, things like concussions, which rattle the brain around inside of the head. You can have falls off of horses where you break your neck. You can have subluxations that, because the spine is malfunctioning, damages and interferes with the normal function of the nerve system. And we'll talk more about that in this series, about how that actually occurs. So those are physical traumas to the nerve system. The second form of traumas are environmental toxins. Anything that we put chemically from the outside in that is a toxin to the body. Cigarette smoke, pesticides in our foods, mercury in the fillings in our teeth. You know, I think back to when I was a kid, you'd go in and they didn't have the quality of porcelain today they can use to put into someone's mouth. And so they put in mercury fillings, lead fillings. Today we know that you can't have a house with lead paint because if a kid peels some of that paint off the wall and eats it, they become very toxic. And yet with these fillings in our teeth, every time we swallowed, which is thousands and thousands of times every day, we're swallowing minute amounts of toxic metals into our body, which damage our body. Drugs interfere with the nerve system. We found that out back in the 60s. Some people say they sort of remember that time. and maybe not the whole event because of the drugs. So, drugs interfere with the nerve system. That's how it works. And we also know that, for example, there are things in our environment that we have little control over, such things as a radio wave shooting around the environment. Today we all live on our cell telephones. Just think about the signal that had to get to your telephone to allow you to work on it as a computer and to talk on it. It came from a tower 10 miles away. It went through multiple buildings, through cement walls. And if you think it's avoiding you and not going through your body before it goes into the telephone, you're sadly mistaken. So these are all environmental toxins. GMOs, we know, now affect the chemistry of the body and create abnormal chemistry inside the body. So all these things are environmental toxins that damage the nerve system and produce, like physical traumas, malfunction, diseases and infirmities, reduced quantity and quality of life. And finally, we know that there are emotional traumas and emotional stresses that damage the nerve system. Today, with our veterans coming home from the Middle East, we record things like post-traumatic stress disorder. We know, for example, that our veterans, as a group, have 22 more suicides per week than the entire rest of the population put together. Now, we either are just recruiting people that are susceptible to suicide into our services, and we're seeing the results of that, or something emotionally happens to people when they're in those kinds of environments, and they affect their ability to function and be whole, healthy human beings. We see this all the time here at the NeuroLIFE Institute. We take care of a lot of the Navy SEALs and some of the special service people from the other service areas. And these people, they may not have been physically traumatized, and yet they come in with tremendous trauma and damage to their nerve system, which is affecting their life and how they function, their relationships, their life expectancy, all of these kinds of issues. But it doesn't just have to happen in a war. It might be an 8-year-old girl is sexually abused at home. All these things are recorded in our nerve system emotionally and affect our ability to be whole, healthy human beings. So at Life University, our goal with all of our programs, in our undergraduate, graduate, and master's programs, all of our programs are designed to produce a way of eliminating some of these interferences so the organism can express more of its potential, to make sure the nervous system is working to the best of its ability. And I probably should put an asterisk on this. A corpse has a nerve system, so it isn't that our nerve system is running this whole show. It's that that thing we call life, that innate intelligence of the body, utilizes the nerve system in order to allow the organism, as Gray's Anatomy says, to control and coordinate every cell, tissue, and organ in the body and adapt the body to an ever-changing environment. That being said, the question then is, how do we as chiropractors use our best knowledge and information today to make sure the nerve system is free of interference and working to the best of its ability? So let me tell you a couple of stories. Let me tell you mine, for example, and how chiropractic and what we're going to be talking about in this 10-part series, functional neurology, fits together. I was an All-American high school basketball player, McDonald's All-American player. During the course of playing through high school and college, tore my ankles up unmercifully, hundreds and hundreds of micro tears, most of them rotating the ankle outward and ripping up the lateral ligaments. 2 broken ankles on one side, 3 on the other side. In fact, back in those days, there wasn't something like what we call sport health science today. Back then, if you could walk, they slapped some tape on you and told you to go play. And I found out later that I had played in the state high school basketball championship on a broken ankle at the end of the game. So, all of that damage to my ankles, and especially the soft tissues, the lateral ligaments, etc., over a period of years, just kept getting worse and worse until in my mid-30s, I would stand in a movie line and shift my weight from one side to the other, where those lateral ligaments should register, should send information to my brain, tighten up, and cause me to not fall over. I did not have that capacity. I would shift, and all of a sudden I'd reach past a point of balance, and I would just fall down on the ground. It got even worse as I got into my 50s and then into my early 60s, where I literally couldn't walk any longer. When they x-rayed my ankles and legs, my tibia wasn't even above my talus any longer. So my feet were flared out for balance. I would hobble along. I couldn't walk more than 25 yards, and so I was pretty much confined to a wheelchair. They finally figured out, fortunately for me, how to replace ankles, which was a really difficult thing. Replacing a hip or replacing a knee is a pretty simple joint. ankle with all those small bones and attachments and ligaments, very complicated. I watched them do research on it for 5 years. They finally went public. They did some experiments. I was one of them. I was the 6th person to have it done here in Atlanta. And when I walked out after a year of 4 surgeries, rebuilding all the soft tissue, reattaching the lateral ligaments, extending a ligament in the back of my leg so I'd have flexion, and finally putting in 2 cobalt ankles on various occasions, I walked out of those casts a year later, and for the first time since 7th grade could walk without pain. And today I'm running and swimming and biking and doing all the things that a person would do with normal ankles. The problem was that my brain, for over 4 decades, probably even longer than that, did not have any or inappropriate information going into it, proprioceptive information from the lower part of my body. So literally areas of my brain weren't working. And what it had shown up with me was I was getting tremors like this. I would take a glass of water, hold it up, and my hand would start to shake when I'd get it to a certain place. I was having difficulty with balance. And when I was examined, they said within 5 years, my head would be doing this, and within 10 or 15 years, I'd be on a walker. And so the question was, how do I get my nerve system up and running? Obviously, the first thing was I had to get my subluxations corrected, which obviously, since I'd been under care, that was something I'd been doing on somewhat of a regular basis. But we now know what happens when an adjustment occurs, or at least some of the things that happen, and how it fires information into the frontal lobe. And so on each of my visits, before I began my care in functional neurology, it always started with an adjustment, because until the subluxation was corrected, we were working on information that was subluxation information, not on areas of my brain that weren't working correctly. So once I was adjusted, and I'll tell you what that looked like, but once I was adjusted, then I would start working, the people here at the NeuroLIFE Institute would start working with me on getting my brain up and functioning again. And they'll go through, I won't go through and belabor it here in this short introduction, but it was literally a series of exercises that I went through to get my brain working again. Chiropractic care, and then addressing the issue of areas of my brain that hadn't been functioning for years. All of a sudden, I'm able to do this, and there isn't a twitch or a walker in sight for me during the course of the rest of my lifetime. It was the perfect combination that I needed for my nerve system. We see this, for example, with some of the SEALs that come in to see us. We had one gentleman that came in that literally his memory was so affected by interference and damage to his brain and his nerve system that his wife would tell him to go to the store, and she'd have to keep the list really simple, maybe 3 or 4 things that he needed to pick up. But he would get to the store, and before he even got out of his car, he would have forgotten why he was at that store. And he would literally sit in his car and cry because he knew he was going to have to call up his wife and ask her why he was there and what he was supposed to be doing while he was sitting there. We saw him for 2 weeks with chiropractic care, correcting subluxation and working on the areas of his brain. And because of neuroplasticity and the ability of the body to heal and repair itself when we're dealing with the nerve system, he walked out of this place a couple of weeks later. Most famously, of course, here at the NeuroLIFE Institute, just feet from where I'm sitting right now making this film, was where we saw Sidney Crosby, the most valuable player in the National Hockey League. He was the poster child for the NHL, youngest MVP ever in the history of the NHL, and had to retire because of 2 massive concussions in Tampa, Florida during the playoffs a few years ago. It ended his career. His brain never recovered. 9 months later, he was still having lapses in memory, difficult skating. He was throwing up, headaches, etc. And he literally had to retire. Wound up quietly at Life University at the NeuroLIFE Institute with our functional neurologists here. They began his care with some of the equipment that we have, along with chiropractic care. And literally 2 weeks later, he was back on ESPN, announcing his comeback with the owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then it hit the front page of Sports Illustrated, his experience here at Life. And literally our phone shut down for the next 3 days of people from all over the world who were calling in, literally calling in, who had no hope, that saw perhaps some hope with chiropractic and functional neurology. So there are a lot of reasons why I'm excited. Some of them very personal reasons for me. Some of them certainly reasons for the institution and its reputation and image, but most importantly for the patients that have come in and received care. And while some of these are dramatic, I remember that really a lot of these things, like Sidney Crosby, is as important as it is that he got his care and got back on the ice and wound up winning the Stanley Cup again. Not only is that important for him, oftentimes these people, and because of what was written in Sports Illustrated, people that otherwise wouldn't even look or know that there are options contacted us. I remember we sat down in the evenings and we'd read through the hundreds of emails that would come in from people all over the world. We figured if they had written to us, we ought to take the time to sit down and read them. And I'll never forget one from a 15-year-old girl in Canada. She said, "I'm an extreme sport athlete. I mountain bike, I rock climb, I board competitively." And she said, "A couple of years ago, I fell and hit my head during a race, and I've not been able to do those sports since. And I recently found out I'll never be able to do them ever again in my lifetime." And she said that I thought about committing suicide because they were my life. They were the spirit of my life. And she said, then I read the story about Sidney Crosby. And I'll never forget, her last line of the letter was, she said, "Can you give me my life back? Can you give me my life back?" And that's what we see in here. We see people that are coming in, that are using chiropractic, certainly to stay well and bringing their family in for care. We see people coming in because they have symptoms and they want to get over them. But really, when you peel all of it away, deep down inside, what people want to do is be more of their potential. They want to have their lives back. And with chiropractic and functional neurology, we're able to do that. I want to mention one other reason why I'm excited about this concept, and I won't even call it the revitalization, the new vitalization of neurology within our profession. I have a good friend by the name of Bill O'Brien, a PhD from Boston University, a futurist. He did his thesis on the rise and fall of movements when he was in college. And he talks about how certain products come into our society, certain products, service, or ideas, and they catch on and they go for a while. And then because either society changes or they can't reinvent themselves, they eventually fade away. I'm reminded, for example, of Sony Walkman. I remember when Sony Walkman came out, it was the greatest thing ever. You could literally, for the first time ever, take your music with you somewhere else. You didn't have to just stay in a room where you had a radio or a stereo or a hi-fi plugged in somewhere. You literally could download this stuff onto a cassette tape, put it in a Sony Walkman, and go to the beach if you wanted to. In retrospect, they were actually producing a new version of Sony Walkman, upgrading the technology, about a new Sony Walkman about every 7 weeks. Kind of reminds me of what iPhones are right now in our society. However, today, Sony Walkman, obsolete. No one has them. Society moved by. They weren't able to reinvent themselves. And so we see certain things that come in and disrupt society. And one of them, of course, you're probably all sitting there right now with it, which is your cell phone. Literally a disruptive innovation that altered how we see the world, how we communicate, how we view each other, how we're able to connect with people all over the world in meaningful ways. And it's a disruptive innovation that has altered society. The question is, what about chiropractic? And so Bill O'Brien was talking about the 5 stages that a product, service, or idea can go through. And the first stage is called the generation phase, the generator. Somebody comes up with an outrageous idea, has very little social impact, few people care about it. For us in chiropractic, that would be D.D. Palmer. Harvey Lillard got adjusted, this African-American entrepreneur got his hearing back, but really it didn't have much social impact whatsoever. In fact, D.D. Palmer even thought about keeping the idea, the concept, as a family secret. And then the second phase is called innovation. And for us, that's B.J. Palmer, the innovator. He didn't invent X-ray, he just used it in an innovative way to advance the profession. He didn't invent marketing, he just used marketing concepts to advance the profession. He didn't invent radio and television, he just learned how to use radio and television to advance the profession. And so this second phase, we see a growth in the social acceptance of this product, service, or idea, in this case, chiropractic. The third phase is called commoditization. This is where we figure out how to make it more available to more people. This means, for example, we went to the insurance industry and the insurance companies were willing to pay for chiropractic care. All these different things that allowed the commodity of chiropractic to be utilized by a broader audience of people. And you think, man, that's great, we just need to keep that rolling. But there's a critical point that comes around about this time. Because with commoditization, you have to move further and further away from the original idea in order for this to be acceptable. So for example, we had to give up a lot of the original principles and ideas of chiropractic for insurance companies to be willing to cover us. And to some cases, it's now boiled down to they simply want to cover us for neck and back pain, even though we have this profession that's neurologically based at its inception and at its core. And so a question then becomes, what is the next stage? And this is where Bill O'Brien says we have a serious decision to make as a profession. Can we rebrand? Can we take our idea and our product, service, or idea, rebrand it based on the original principles and accelerate its growth? Or do we fall into the trap of trying to make it more available to more consumers by adding more product, services, or ideas into the original or into the existing concept? And we see that going on in our profession today. It's a great split in chiropractic. We've now gone all the way down to where we see there are people that actually want to use drugs and surgery in the practice of chiropractic. And on the surface, you'd think, well, if we add more services in, people could be reimbursed more effectively, the profession would be more widely accepted in the general population. But in fact, the opposite becomes true over a period of time. Because what happens is you get a number of the professions, in this case, physical therapy, osteopathy, chiropractic, medicine, and they all, to the consumer, look basically like the same thing. They're all offering basically the same kinds of service. And of course, then the consumer is going to make a decision which one of those practitioners do they want to go to for whatever they're looking for. And if they all look the same, I'm going to suggest to you that chiropractic probably comes out on the bottom of that heap in the decision-making process of a consumer until they're educated. So here's the question. Do we need to fall into that trap, what's called attenuation, which is the end of most product, services, and ideas? Or can we take and reinvent ourselves like the internet is doing, like iPhone is doing, and move it to the next level? And the next level means a rebranding of our profession back to what it originally was, which is a neurologically based profession. So I want to welcome you to this 10-part series. It's going to show you the interplay between chiropractic and functional neurology. The series is set up in such a way that you can do most of the study at home, pass various modules. Some of the modules can be streamed in, and then of course there'll be a couple of residents on our campus and our NeuroLIFE Institute here at the campus and in Midtown Atlanta with our functional neurologists, where you'll need to come in to learn how to utilize the equipment and materials, etc. At the end of this time, this 100-hour course, you'll be able to handle most of the issues in your practice. You'll have an entirely different way of looking at people with post-traumatic stress disorder, with concussion, with children that have dyslexia or autism, with corporate executives coming in with neurodegenerative diseases. You'll not only be able to look at them differently and understand what's going on, but through chiropractic and functional neurology, provide them the resources to not only regain their health, but to maximize their expression and their potential. You'll find a way, for example, of bringing in people, as we do here, that are professional athletes, who are not just coming in to get over an injury or to regain a certain skill, but they're actually coming in order to maximize high performance in their nerve system. And so you will see us talking about, the functional neurologists in these presentations, how do we move people from condition-based care to corrective care for their nerve system, and then to optimum function, optimum expression, not only for health, but for high performances, athletes and executives and parents, et cetera, et cetera. So watch for that arc as we're going through all of this. At the end of that time, you'll be able to handle most of these things. And because in certain cases, there are extreme cases where certain types of equipment and even higher levels of understanding may be involved, you'll have a way of referring those people in to the NeuroLIFE Institute for short terms of care, usually a few days to a couple of weeks, and then be sent back to your practice for your ongoing care with them for the rest of their lifetime. So get ready to settle in. You've got a lot of work in front of you. You've got a number of great instructors that are living this, that are working as functional neurologists. All of them are chiropractors as their training and their degree program. So you'll be able to relate to them very specifically and very uniquely. We are in an exciting time in our career of where we have the opportunity as a profession to rebrand ourselves as the experts, not only in these areas, but experts in neurology and experts in functional neurology. And I can tell you that we have all the time medical doctors from the various medical schools and institutions and hospitals coming around to seeing what we're doing in these places, because they see people getting well without drugs, without surgery. And in fact, in their portfolio of tools, all they have are basically drugs. And of course, these things we know with the opioid crisis going on today, are things that even doctors are now, honest doctors are trying to avoid because of their addictive natures. And they want to see, is there a way for people to get well, to regain their health, and to maximize their potential without those things? And we have the answer for that. And you're about ready to start on a process, a program of learning how to do this in your practice, in your community, and becoming the expert in this unique area. Welcome to the 100-hour course. Welcome to Life University. Welcome to the NeuroLIFE Institute.